Let's back to one of the main characters in our narrative, Great Grandfather Alfred. In February 1905, Teddy Roosevelt is president and Alfred remarries. It is 6 years since his divorce from Emma Blodgett. His second bride is Margaret Anderson Williams. She was born in Denmark, immigrated to the U.S. as a child. Present-day survivors remember her as a delightful lady. She was previously married to Owen Williams and has 3 children by him. That marriage ended in the tragic, lethal fall from a tree as Owen worked trimming trees. And that was apparently about 1902. At their marriage in 1905, Alfred is 47, Margaret 27. The household of Alfred is now pretty full. We have Al, his 15-year-old twin daughters Hazel and Myrtle, new wife Margaret, and her 3 kids. There are a lot of mouths to feed. Is Al selling enough insurance to do that? The U.S. Census of 1910 will answer that question, but in the meantime, there are some known facts to relate. The years between 1905 and 1910 are bursting with events in the lives of the Horners. We know that Howard Alfred Horner has left the Will Hanchey household, has courted and married Mary Jensen in 1907. He, with some backing, I am sure, from the Hancheys, is about to begin his own truck farming operation. That occupation will define the Horner name in the community for the next 75 years. The following year, in 1908, their eldest son, Kenneth, is born. He is the first of the 6 children that will be born to Howard and Mary. But the same year of Ken's birth, we have the following, and we picked this up from the Tomah, Wisconsin Journal, dated October 30, 1908.
John F. Horner died at his home near Shennington at 9:00 p.m., October 23, 1908. Mr. Horner was born in Sheffield, England, October 18, 1831. He was first married to Miss Mary Wainwright, and to this union born 3 children, viz. John Horner, Jr., Mrs. Susie Gunther of Racine, Wisconsin, and Alfred Horner of Tacoma, Washington, who are all living. His first wife died in 1874, and he was remarried in 1876 to Miss Martha Hammond, who survives him. To this union were born 5 children, Richard, Edmund, Nellie, Irwin, and Walter, all of whom live at home except Edmund, who is located at Roscoe, Illinois. When a young man, Mr. Horner removed from England to America and settled in Racine, Wisconsin, wherein he was engaged in the trade of file making. When the time came that files were made by machinery, he could not follow that trade longer. So in 1896, he moved from Racine and purchased the farm in the town of Cutler, Juneau County, where he resided until the time of his death and followed the occupation of farming. Mr. Horner had always been a very active man until about a year ago, when he suffered a slight stroke of paralysis, and since that time he has been in feeble health, but not so as to confine him in the house. He is still being quite active for a man of his age. Last Friday morning he came to Shennington, and while sitting in Louis Meltison's store, was suddenly prostrated by another stroke. Medical aid was summoned, and he was removed to his home on a cot, but only lived until 9 p.m. The funeral was held from his late residence Sunday afternoon, it being Mr. Horner's request before he died that Mr. D. W. Sheen should take charge of the services. He therefore read the scriptures, made a few remarks, and offered prayer. The interment took place at the Danish Lutheran Cemetery. Mr. Horner was an honest and upright man in all his dealings, and had had the respect of all who knew him, which was evidenced by the large attendance at the funeral of old neighbors and friends. Those from abroad who attended were Mrs. Susie Gunther, a daughter of Racine, Wisconsin, and two sisters of Mrs. Horner, viz. Miss Ellen Potts of Corliss, now Stuyvesant, Wisconsin, and Ms. Lizzie Brazee of Genoa, Wisconsin.
The unknown to me person who posted this added this note: "I am not related, hope this will help a researcher." And note, Shennington is in Monroe County, Wisconsin, and it was mentioned his farm was in Juneau County, which borders Monroe County at Shennington, and she's signed it as Ann, and I don't know anything more about Ann than that. With this information, I asked my son Mike and his wife Shelley to make a detour on their next trip to their cabin in Black River Falls. They find not only Shennington, but note that it is on a line of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. It is really only a wide spot in Highway 21 now, but probably never was much more than a small village. Mike and Shelley also find a building that probably housed Mr. Louis Meltison's store. But they found more: the Danish Lutheran Church graveyard, and they even found the stones that marked the final resting place of John Forrest Horner and his mentally challenged daughter, Ellen. On the internet, I find a picture of the railroad depot as it probably looked in John's day, and also one that may have been taken a few years later, although we're not sure about that. Do you suppose that one of the men in these pictures could have been John? Meanwhile, leaving the John Forrest Horner family to their grief and wondering how the family will survive, I go back to wondering how the South Side holiness man, Howard, met and courted Mary Jensen, the North Side Baptist girl. I have a scenario I'll put out to you in a way that involves Howard's father, Alfred, and his new wife. 3 years previously, in 1905, you will recall, Al has remarried and now is responsible for the support of his own twin daughters, plus new wife Margaret and her 3 youngsters. In 1906 and 1907, they add their own daughters, Eunice and Blanche, to the dependents. Al is a 50-year-old father, and I suspect he is not selling enough life insurance to carry the financial load. A new auto manufacturing company has just been organized in Flint, Michigan. They call it General Motors. Al learns they pay good wages. And we also pick up a hint that Margaret may have previously spent some time in Flint. But anyhow, Al has learned about General Motors, and like his father, Richard, Alfred shows a willingness to uproot the family in search of economic opportunity. So sometime between 1905 and 1910, Great Grandfather Alfred gathers up most of the family, moves to Flint to work for the new automaker. I say most of the family because Myrtle and Hazel are left behind to fend for themselves. I don't know the exact year this occurs, but it happens when they are between 15 and 20 years of age. We do have records of them as working girls as early as 1906. They are teenagers in their own household and on their own. Now back to Howard and Mary meeting. We know the teenage twins, Hazel and Myrtle, support themselves by going to work in one of Racine's factories. Do you suppose it might be the same shirt factory where Mary Jensen talked about working when she was young? It is not hard then to imagine the young twins introducing their brother Howard, who is trying to look after them, to a fellow worker named Mary Jensen. Just a guess on my part, but both aunts Leon and Grace thought it sounded very plausible to them. A plausible scenario that solves my question of how Howard met Mary. We are at this point tracking multiple people, so let us take this opportunity to talk about Alfred and his new family. The divorce from Emma Blodgett was final in 1899, and she is out of his life. Somewhere he meets a delightful young lady, Margaret Johanna Anderson, whose given name was changed at Ellis Island from Magdalena, was born in Denmark in 1877, emigrated with her family to the U.S. in 1891 when she was 14. She married and bore 3 children to Owen Williams. That marriage ended in tragedy, but as noted, she is met, courted, and married by Great Grandfather Alfred in 1905. It is 6 years since his divorce from Emma. He is 47 and young, attractive Margaret is 27. It is from that marriage that Horner descendants that I knew little of descended. Their first child is daughter Eunice, born a year later. The second, another daughter, Blanche, born 15 months after that in 1907. Father Alfred is 49 years old. In all the years until very recently, I knew almost nothing about these women, the men they married, or where they lived, or the lives they led. Now I have been in communication with both Don Hoff in California and Shirley Fritz Mooney in Wisconsin, and learned a little of this branch of the family of which I had always been ignorant. We go a different direction here for a moment. Henry and Hattie Horner Blish's daughter, Marjorie, dies at the age of 16 in 1916. She will become the 3rd person buried in the Horner family plot in Mound Cemetery, joining her grandparents, Richard and Harriet. Her grave is in Lot 7. The family monument is still in place, crossways, smack dab in the middle of Lot 8. Its location will help us solve the mystery of the tombstone behind the barn. Al and Maggie's daughter Eunice marries John Hoff in 1923. The couple moves to California in 1931. Their grandson is my newfound second cousin, Don Hoff. He and I have been collaborating to piece together this genealogical puzzle. Al and Maggie's second daughter, Blanche, marries Emil Fritz in 1925, and their daughter, Shirley Fritz Mooney, who lives in Milton, Wisconsin, is also a newfound second cousin. Shirley was born in 1929. Don and Shirley have furnished information that was unknown to me. I am grateful to them. My sister Kathy and my wife Joyce both have hazy memories of meeting Blanche as she worked as a clerk at Zahn's in the 1950s. That store, old-timers from Racine will recall, was on Monument Square between 5th and 6th Street. It became a victim of the revolution in retailing with the advent of the malls and discount chains. Shirley says her mother worked there for 24 years. And Blanche's husband, Emil Fritz, Blanche's husband, Emil Fritz, died, she joined her sister Eunice in California for a time, but returned to Racine and then joined Shirley near Janesville in the years before her death. Shirley said most family pictures were lost when her mother moved and failed to retrieve them from the attic. Don Hoff said most of their pictures were lost in a fire. We have a few of their photos. We would love to have seen more.